So welcome to week 3 of this Ignite Bootcamp. Okay, this is the final week. We are going to, of course, learn new things in these 3 days and 2 homework, and we are going to wrap something up, okay, in order to leave you with a kind of a good feeling, but also you never stop learning. So let's kick right into it. So this is day 1 of week 3. A word by myself. My name is Stefano. I'm one of the front-end teachers, okay, along with the other Stefano. So yeah, I know, confusing. 2 Stefanos, both front-enders, but this is what we do. And yeah, I have a bachelor in multimedia science and technology, so like computer science, and I am also a freelance developer and a consultant. So yeah, I'm in this field by, let's say, from 6 or 7 years, okay? So I've done stuff, and I'm one of the teachers in the full stack development web course. Okay, so what are we going to see today? I know the past days with Diego and Stefano, you work with some JavaScript, some front end, okay? I think the last lesson of last week, you entered the DOM manipulation universe, okay? So you learn how to create elements and actually how to position elements, how to append elements to your page, okay? This is very useful. This is very fun. But the only problem with that, so the only difference, let's say the only difference between that and the real world application is actually that right now you only know how to append your own element to your page, okay? So the data actually you bake into your page. You don't have yet the knowledge to append data something coming from something else. And this is exactly what we are. So what are we going to see? Am I muted? No, okay. Okay, so can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So today we are going to see an introduction to HTTP, okay, to the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which is the heart of data communication around the web, basically. And more than that, we are going to have a word about AJAX. AJAX is a technology that allows you to basically retrieve and send data over the web. Okay, it works with the HTTP protocol, and it's pretty cool. It's a modern technology. It allows your page to actually have the content dynamically set up. Okay, you don't need to refresh the page in order to get new data, fresh data from the internet. You can programmatically populate your page with data that is coming from outside. Without refreshing, without the server, without having to press F5 in your browser. And this is very convenient, this is very modern. And if you think about it, most of the modern web application you interact with nowadays, let's think about whatever, Facebook, for just giving an example, works with this kind of data, okay? They work also with other higher level frameworks, okay? They do not manipulate directly the DOM, because higher level application demands higher level framework. But yeah, at the core, they use AJAX to populate the page with dynamic content. This is exactly what we are going to see today. Why are we going to do this? Yes, because as I just said, we now are able to create marvelous applications, but they kind of live standalone, okay? They are not connected with the outside world. And so the only data we can bake in is our own. We need to actually be able to fetch remote data and make our page alive. And yeah, we are going also to have a theoretical couple of slides about HTTP, okay, just to give you the sense of it, the meaning of it, because it's a very important technology, as you can imagine, and it's an underlying basis and structure for every web application today. So yeah, we are going to have a word about that as well. Yeah, with AJAX, we will be able to receive and send information from external APIs at our will. An API is a web service, basically, okay? It's an endpoint, it's a URL, a route you can query in order to get and send information. So this is exactly what we are not going to see how to create APIs, okay? This is if we want, this is a subject of the full stack course, but we are going to see from a front-end perspective, how to interact with it. Okay, let's pretend someone else created these APIs, these web services, and we are just going to use them to populate our page. So at the end of the day, I hope you will be able to fetch use information from the outside world, okay, from an outside source, and we are going to know a little more about what this HTTP stands for from a theoretical standpoint as well. Okay, so let's start. So any questions until now? If you have any question, write them into the chat so Alessia can point them out to me, because I'm not actually reading the chat right now. She is, or speaking out loud. Okay, I'm here for you. This is 2 hours for ourselves, for getting in touch with these technologies. And it's also a very important thing. It's also to have your feedback. So please ask me questions if you have any. So let's have a little word about HTTP. Okay, what HTTP is, it stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And you can imagine it as a message, okay, that you are sending to other computers, to other servers, in order to retrieve or to send information, okay? Remember, when you work with the browser, we always refer it as the client, okay? The client, the browser, is what is used to consume information, to present information, okay? When we want to retrieve data, we need to contact another machine, another computer, that which purpose is not to consume data, but to retrieve data and to send it over. Okay, so we as the client, as the browser, every time we open a web page, we are sending a request in order to get information for populating our page. Okay, so the HTTP protocol is just for that. It's for sending and retrieving information from servers, from other computers. Every message we send to on our side, on the client side, is called the request. Okay, so we send, as the browser, we send requests. And every reply, so every time the server answers to us, they are getting us a response. Okay, so it's always a matter of sending a request and receive a response back. This is how the protocol works. This is how every interaction with a web page works. Okay, every time you refresh the page, this happens. So knowing what is going on under the hood, it's very important. So let's begin to have a word about the request. Okay, the message we send over by our browser. So a request contains several things. Okay, so several things. The first important, the most important one is the URL. Okay, so in order to be successful, a request must contain an URL. So the address we are contacting, basically, the address we want to reach in order to get the information or to send information. For example, this is a fake URL. Okay, we are going to work with real ones in a second, but we need to, just like we send a message, you need to know the recipient, right? You need to know an address, a phone number. This is the information you need in order to know where to send your request, basically. And then we have additional information, like the method. The method is used for discerning the type of request you are making. Okay, you can send several requests for several different purposes. The most important one, and the default one as well, is get. Okay, get is a method used to retrieve information. Okay, so if our request is of type GET, we are querying an endpoint, a server, in order to retrieve some data. So this is what the GET is for. The POST, instead, is for creating data, is for sending new data. So this is a request for creating, let's say, a record in a database, is for creating a new user. When you register to Facebook, on TikTok, whatever, you are basically sending over your information, right? Because you want to make create an account, let's say, in order to create your account, you send a post request. So for creating a new entity, a new resource, and we will see in a second how it works, but get is for retrieving and post is for creating, okay, creating new resources. Put is another one. Put is used for editing a resource, an existing resource. Okay, so if we want to change our password, if we want to change our email address in our Facebook account, the browser will send a put request because we want to modify, to edit an existing resource. And finally, so these are not the only four methods. There are many others, but these are the most important ones. The last one we will talk about in this bootcamp is delete. Delete, as you can imagine, is just for deleting an existing resource. Okay, so we are sending the information about the resource we want to delete, and with the delete method, that hopefully is going to be deleted. So get is for retrieving, post is for creating, put is for editing, and delete is for deleting. Okay, this there is an acronym with these HTTP methods that is called CRUD. And CRUD, basically, if your application does perform CRUD, it means you can create, read, update, and delete, okay, using these four methods. This is an acronym we use internally. Yeah, so this is, again, an option for your HTTP request, okay? It is an option. So if you don't put the method explicitly, the browser will interpret your request as a GET request, okay? The GET is the default one. We are going to see how this works in a second. And then we can also provide additional information, additional metadata, like the headers. Okay, the headers is an object containing basically every metadata regarding your request. Okay, let's say you want to. So as you can imagine, let's continue with this Facebook example, okay? Only you can see your profile page and be able to edit it, to add new content, to add new photos, okay? In order for the browser, in order to be able to know that is you, the owner of the page, and allow you to create new photos, to create new posts, the browser needs to recognize you, right, in some form, in order to be able to understand that you are the owner of your Facebook page, and just you can, and only you can modify it, let's say. So in order to provide this kind of authentication, your HTTP request will always contain a special header. A header of type authentication is basically your way of saying, okay, you know, this is me. Please allow me to edit my profile page, for example. And if your HTTP request does not have this specific header, you will be not allowed to edit your own page, right? Because the server does not recognize you. So headers are like metadata for your request in order to add additional information to it. And for example, we will see several type of headers, headers content, let's say. So authentication cookies, we need to sometimes specify the content type of our request. So these are additional metadata information for our request. And finally, some requests may contain a payload. A payload is the body, the body of the request, so the content of the request. Okay, sometimes you will need to attach a payload, so a body to your request, because maybe you want to create a new user. Okay, you want to make a post call for creating a new user in your social network. And the payload at that point will have to contain the username and the password of the user you want to create, for example, okay? Otherwise, without this kind of information, you will not be able to create anything, because you don't know which email you want to associate the new account with, or the password the user chose. So you need, in this kind of situations, to attach a body to your request, and that is called the payload, or the body of the request. It's the same thing. So let's break this down even further. Let's have a talk. So let's have a word about the URL. So the only parameter actually needed for a fetch request, for retrieving data, okay? The URL is mandatory. You cannot perform a remote request without the URL, because otherwise your request wouldn't know where to point, okay, where to go in order to retrieve that data. So the URL is mandatory. And it is the endpoint address we are reaching out for, okay? We want to contact in order to retrieve information. As you can imagine, yeah, this is mandatory. And it can start with HTTP or HTTPS, okay? When HTTPS is just the secure and encrypted version on HTTP, okay? Nowadays, most websites use the encrypted version of this protocol, because otherwise a man in the middle could sniff it and could understand, could basically retrieve the request and the response, inject himself inside this transaction, okay? And HTTPS is just for securing it, applying some cryptography in order to make these messages unreadable. Okay, basically. Okay, and that's for the URL. We are done with the URL. Let's move to the method. As I said, the method tells the endpoint what are we going to do with our request, what is the purpose of our request. Okay, it can be of type get, which is also the implicit one, default one. Get means I want some information. Post instead is saying that the endpoint, so the server, I'm sending some information. I want to create something new. I want to use this data in order to create something new. And the post call, the post method in a call basically needs the body. Okay, the body we were talking before is needed in the post, because we need to send over the information we want to save. Basically, the resource we want to create needs some information on our side. And so we are sending the post with the body usually. We will see, I don't think today, but later days, you are going to see some post calls with the body. And yeah, the put is going to say to the server, I want to edit something, an existing resource. So I'm the owner of this profile, or my profile page, on my Facebook profile page. I want to change my email. And so the put method in your call will just point to the existing profile and edit some information, the password, the email address, whatever. Okay. And finally, the delete means, okay, you know what? I know I want to delete this resource. So I will point to this resource with the delete command, with the delete method. And hopefully, if my resource has been found from the server, that is going to be deleted. And so I'm going to successfully log out and basically deleting the resource. Yeah, these are not the only methods, but these, as I can assure you, working with this kind of stuff, these are the most requested ones, and these are the most used ones. Absolutely. You are going to implement services for these kind of methods, basically, for creating, deleting, updating, and reading. Yeah, the headers is probably the most obscure right now, right? Because we really don't know what to put inside of here. But yeah, they specify some extra information. You don't need these all the times, okay? If you want to secure your transaction, if you want to provide some kind of additional information, you will use the headers. Otherwise, you will be fine without them. But yeah, there are specific cases in which you want to use this. Sometimes for applying a content type to your request, okay? Because when you are sending data over in order to make a post call and create a new resource, for example, you want to specify that your data is actually an object, is an object in the JSON format. And so you will need to set a specific content type for your call, basically. Other times, as I said, you need to provide authorization in order to consume some endpoints, some APIs. You need to provide a proof to the server that you are the one in charge of your profile. And so only you can delete and update your profile on Facebook, let's say. Without the authorization, your request will be denied, because you don't have the proof to be the owner of that resource. And so you are not going to be allowed to edit it, basically. And Yeah, some cookie for, let's say, storing some data into your browser, or for persisting for some tracing purposes. Yeah, other stuff. But again, these are just some options. Okay, these are not tied specifically. These are not the only type of headers you can specify, and more importantly, you can create your own. So these are not fixed. Okay, you can also create your own if you need, in order to provide your own metadata for the request and the response you are getting and sending from a server. So yeah, these can be pretty expanded depending on your needs, basically. And
Stefano, I'm sorry, we have a couple of questions.
Yeah,
one is from Jaguar. He asked, are we talking about any specific database on the backend side, or not in particular, just
so in this
I think about before?
So in these 3 weeks, we unfortunately do not have the time to also create some backend services. So we are not going to create API, we are not going to create endpoints, and we are not going to contact any persistent storage architecture like a database. Okay, unfortunately, we are going to see how to make your frontend interact with those resources and with those endpoints. Usually, in a real world scenario, you will interact with some kind of database. Okay, sure, probably some non-relational ones like MongoDB, or some relational ones, it depends. But yeah, unfortunately, in 3 weeks, this is already plenty of stuff.
Okay, and then we have Miguel that asks if cookies are local storages.
Cookies are they are the grandfather of local storages, let's say. They are used nowadays as well. They started really early before, like in the in the end of the 90s. Okay, they are used for store some information on the client side in order to, again, provide authorization or tracing your navigation, in order to provide some content, some profilation. And yeah, they are less and less used nowadays, because a cookie is sent over in every request, okay, and it's getting back in every response. So it's like additional information you are overloading your request with. So it's not optimal from a data efficiency perspective, okay, because you are sending this back and forth, and while local storage actually just takes some kilobytes of storage in your browser and doesn't need to be taken over at every step. Okay, so yeah, they serve different purposes. They are kind of the same thing, but yeah, not entirely. Nowadays, you can probably live with simple application. You can just live with local storage. Okay, thank you very much for your question. Keep them on. So let's have a last word about the payload. Okay, we specified that the payload is used just when you need to provide some data along your request. So for example, if you are going to create a new entity, you are going to create a new account, you will need to provide at least, I don't know, the email and the password, right, for that account. Otherwise, what resource can we create without those kind of information? And so you are going to pass that information from the browser to the server as the payload of your request. Okay. Usually, a payload is used for post and put calls as the methods. Okay, so with the post, of course, for sending along the content of the resource you want to create, and for the put, just for editing a single resource. So you need to provide the property you want to change. Okay, you need to provide a modification to the existing resource you want to provide. You want to modify. And so the payload is just for that. It's an object that you are going to stringify in order to be sent to the server. The server will then parse the string again into an object, understand what you want to do, and then responding accordingly, okay, by the method. If it was a post call, let's create a new resource. If it was a put call, let's edit an existing one, and so on and so forth. So the payload, also known as the body of the request, is some kind of additional data you can provide to your HTTP request, basically. Yeah, as I just said, we usually send payloads only when we want to create some resource or editing them. So with the post and the put method in our request. Okay, and that concludes an overview about the request. Let's have a word as well about the response. Okay, so let's pretend we want to retrieve some data. So we are going to make a call, a fetch call. So we are going to provide a get method in order to retrieve some data. What are we getting back, actually, is the question. Well, the response is sent back to us from the server. Okay, from the browser, when we do a request, hopefully we will get back a response, and that is sent from the server. The response, absolutely, most of the time, as well contains a payload. Okay, because if we want to see our posts in our Facebook feed and we open Facebook, we are sending a request of type get, saying, oh, you know, Facebook, I'm here, I'm loading the page, please send me back the post of my friends. And the Facebook server actually will send you back the data, right, in order to create your web page. And that is done with the payload. The payload actually contains the data. So for every post, it will contain the text of the post, the creator of the post, the date, some other stuff. Okay, so the response in the payload will stuff pretty much everything that is going to be responded back to us as the browser. We are also receiving a number which is called the status code. The status code will tell us at a glance, without actually any doubt, the result of the operation. Okay, because maybe sometimes the operation, our requests, are not going to be successfully processed. Okay, if we want to send a request and we are contacting some data, maybe we are asking for some data that is not present anymore. Okay, we want to open a Facebook post, we are clicking on it, but before we click, actually the owner deleted it. Okay, and so that resource is not existing anymore. We are clicking on a thing, we are asking for some data that is not present anymore. And so that response will not contain any data for us. And in the status code will immediately tell us that something went wrong. Probably because the resource we were asking for is not existing. And so the status code is actually a simple number starting from 200 and up, telling us what happened with our request and what actually we are getting back from the server. We are going to see some examples later on. And as well, the response contains some headers, okay, some metadata, some extra information about the stuff that the server is sending back to us, basically. So we are absolutely getting some headers as well, most of the times. So the status code, as I said, is a number from 200 and up, telling us immediately what if our request was successful or not. So, for example, if we are getting back 200 is the best number you can receive, because it means everything went right, the server understood what we were asking for, and the response we are getting actually contains the information we requested. Okay, nice, woohoo, welcome. This is very nice. Not all the times we are going to receive a 200, but hopefully if we receive a 200, everything went well. And so we are receiving back what we asked for. We may receive, also some other codes from the same family. Okay, everything that starts with the 2 actually is a good sign. For example, 201 means created. When you are sending a request for creating a new information, and if you pay attention, it means we send our request with the post method. So if we send a post request and we are and the resource has been created successfully in the database in the server, we are getting back 201. 201 in the browser lingo, in the HTTP lingo, means created. So created is a good sign. Okay, yeah, we were asking for creating a new resource, and that resource actually got created. So we are getting back 201 as a feedback. Okay, this is a feedback that everything went well in our post request. So created means everything is okay. You may also receive some code belonging to the 300 family. Okay, as an example, 301. It means it's a good sign. It means that our resource actually, I asked for a resource believing that it was in a specific place. And yeah, the resource was found, but was in another place. Okay, so we got 301 moved. Or some redirects are also in the 300 families. Okay, so it means, yeah, okay, I understand you. Here's everything went well, but I had to redirect you, basically. Or yeah, the information was something somewhere else. Okay, but yeah, this is it. This is everything in the general picture went well. But you can also receive some codes belonging to the 400 family. And the 400 family means usually you screwed up. Okay, you send the request that was not right, and you are getting back a 400 code because something went wrong, and it's actually your fault as the browser, as the client. Okay, not the fault by the server, but you asked maybe for something that is not existing anymore, or you asked for a resource in the wrong way, or something went wrong. Please revise your request because something went wrong with it. So for example, 401 is a really classic one. It means unauthorized. If you try to contact the Facebook server for deleting Mark Zuckerberg profile, for example, you will most likely receive a 401 as the status code back, okay? Because you are not allowed to mess with Mark Zuckerberg profile or my profile as well, okay? You are not the owner of that resource. And so you cannot tamper with it. You cannot work with that resource. You can probably just work with your own resources. And so 401 means, yeah, okay, technically you were right, but you are not allowed to do this. And so you are getting 401 back. Or 404 is probably the most famous one. Okay, it means not found. So you are asking for a resource that is not existing. And so 404 means, okay, sometimes you go to the web page and that page got deleted and you went and a giant 404 jumps out from the screen. And that is just the way from the server saying, oh yeah, you know, that resource is not existing. Maybe it was once, but now it's not. And there's nothing we can do about it. Please try to make a request for something else. And the final family is the 500 family. And 500 means, okay, you were right, but I screwed up as the server. Okay, so your request from the browser went well, but something got wrong processing your request by the server. So the server crashed, maybe because it was not coded correctly, or maybe because there is some backend problem. Okay, some backend problem that means, yeah, the resource is not here, unfortunately, because there was a problem with the server. And by the way, it means internal server error. Okay, so what about some examples out of this? Can we actually mimic some of these calls, some of these requests in order to see if we are getting something back? Okay, what is the best way for doing this? The best way is actually, and try to have a look inside your console in the browser in the network tab. Okay, if you go into the network tab in every page you visit, you will find a plethora of calls, okay, of requests and responses. And so you can actually have a look on what's happening under the hood in the meaning of understanding the network communication that is going on between the browser and the server. Another way of doing this is using a program or a client in order to mimic these calls, okay, in order to understand, to trigger a call and see what you are getting back from the server. And the most famous program, the most famous client or application for doing this is not a browser, it's called Postman. Okay, Postman, I don't know if you are familiar with Postman, but actually this is a very popular application by front-enders and back-enders because it's useful for both sides and actually let you to mimic, to try an endpoint, to try to make a request to some endpoint and see what you are getting back. Okay, basically. And this is exactly what we are going to do right now. We are going to open Postman. I will briefly show you the main characteristics of it, and we are going to try and make a call, okay, and see if we are getting back 200, 201, 404, whatever. So understanding what is going on. Any questions till now? Do you want to know anything else?
Yes, we have a question from Mario. Always according to cookies. I didn't want to interrupt you, Stefano. Mario asked, when a page uses CDN resource just for styling or behavior like Bootstrap, is it using cookies too?
Well, to see if something is using cookies, you can just go into the browser, into the little shield or whatever, and you can, I don't know if Firefox, how you can see this, but you can actually inspect and see if you are using some cookies as an example. What is the specific case he's asking for? Can you repeat it to me?
Well, I'm gonna send you the question.
I always lose the chat. Oh yeah.
Yes, the last one.
Okay. Okay, when a page uses a CDN resource just for styling, is using cookies? Well, not technically. You are just retrieving. So when you are using a CDN, most of the times it's for getting, I don't know, a CSS file or a JavaScript file, okay, in order to get it from a remote endpoint, let's say, instead of baking it into your application. So usually, no, if you are using the Bootstrap CDN, for example, you are just getting back the CSS file and the browser will incorporate it into your page. Cookies are most of the times for collecting user data. Okay, so if you, let's say you log into a web application, okay, you log into, I don't know, eBay, you log into eBay, okay, and you see your profile. Then you close the tab, you open another tab in the same browser, and you go back into eBay. You will see that you are already logged in, probably. That is because the browser is storing some information about your previous session. And so the browser already knows you have logged in the past, so you don't need to log in again. That information usually is resilient in the browser in a cookie form, okay, or in the local storage form. So the most modern way of doing it is with local storage, okay, because the local storage API is more capable, can store more information, and actually it's not sent over for a back and forth between the client and the server. So it's a more efficient way of doing this. It's just staying on the client. So in this case, local storage makes more sense. But other times, probably eBay also, as you may know, wants to know what you search on the internet, okay, like Facebook, like whatever. And so they probably will set a cookie on your browser in order to understand which products you see the most, in order to provide you some useful advertisement later on when you go to eBay again. Okay, so this is kind of stuff. This is the kind of stuff you can do with cookies and not with local storage. So these are for different purposes. But usually, when you use a CDN, you are just requesting for a file for some resource, and you are getting that back, basically. Okay. No problem. So let's see what this Postman is all about. Okay. And then we are going to go back to the slides. So this is the interface of Postman. So let me see if I can, okay, hide this. Great. So this, I hope you can see this. Let me zoom in a little bit for you. So this is a famous application called Postman. And just like the name implies, it's an application meant to create some, so for sending messages, okay, and receiving messages, just like a postman. So, for example, this is a new request, okay? This is an interface for creating a request, mimicking, faking a browser request, basically. So as you can see, we have the middle section here, the upper middle section is a giant select with the method of your call, okay, this is the get, and as I said, this is the default one. So every new request you're going to make is going to be a get one, unless you decide to change it. And we can also create post, we can create put, patch, delete, okay, many others. We talked about just the first 4 or so. And the next tweet is an input where you can provide the URL, so the address for your request, okay? And here I already baked in a URL for from a famous API testing website, which is called JSON placeholder. Okay, if you go on, if you look for JSON placeholder on Google, you will find that they pretty much have some fake endpoints in order to make you test the capability of your application, okay, or test Postman, just like in this case. And so, for example, this is an URL. I will also paste it into the chat if you don't want to copy by hand. But basically, this is a JSON placeholder fake endpoint that ends with /posts, okay? So this is providing some post resources. For example, if I do a get on this and I send my request, let's see what I'm getting back. This is, so the upper section is for the request and the lower section is for the response, is what you are getting back from this endpoint. And so what are we getting back is the actual data, okay? So as you can see, this is a very long response, okay? This is just like, I think, 100 posts, something like that. And they are all objects. This is a post, so this is a post, this is another one, and this is an array wrapping them all up. So as you can see, the response is basically an array of objects, each object representing a post. These are completely fake posts, okay? I didn't create them. As you can see, they are filled with lorem ipsum and some placeholder text, because of course this is called JSON placeholder. And so we are getting back some fake posts in order to tinker with them, okay, to play with them, to see if actually we are able to create a page and display these posts. And so this is Postman at a glance. Okay, you have also the capability to provide, again, authorization headers, additional headers, to provide a body for your request if you want to create a new resource, okay, settings, stuff like that. But as you can see, for retrieving data, it's just a matter of selecting get, which is also, again, the default one, and providing the URL. And if we click send, we are getting back. This is the response. As you can see, the status is 200, okay. So it means our request went well, was successful. We are retrieving data back, and the status code is 200, because we are saying, oh, okay, great. We already know everything went well. If I try to, I don't know, provide an endpoint that doesn't exist, okay, so instead of post, I'm creating non-existing. Okay, there is no API for this endpoint, okay? This endpoint is a completely fake one. If I try to send a request on this, I will get nothing as the response. The response is empty, and I'm getting 404, not found, okay? Because this endpoint does not exist. It makes sense. So if you go on the JSON placeholder page, you will actually see that they have several endpoints you can work with. JSON placeholder. And so, yeah, these are fake online APIs for testing and prototyping. And as you can see, we can use posts, comment, albums, photos, to-dos, users. Okay, all of these endpoints will provide us some information for testing. For example, comments, if we try on Postman to do comments, instead of, for creating for an existing endpoint, actually, we are getting back comments, okay? As you can see, each comment is made of a name, an email, a body, a post ID. So these are comments related to some posts, basically, the posts we were seeing before. And again, because this is a valid endpoint, we are getting a 200, we are getting the response back. So let's try to create a web page out of this? Wouldn't it be great if we actually would be able to create a web page and retrieve this information, not from a static client like this Postman application, but inside our web page, okay, in the HTML code? Wouldn't it be nice? At that point, we would have the knowledge to actually contact any API and retrieve information back and actually try to create a web page out of the data we are getting from the internet. Okay, this is the purpose of today's lesson. We want to create a function that is capable of retrieving this information dynamically on the fly whenever our page loads and populate the page with this data. And JSON placeholder is a great place for mocking and prototyping, because we will learn how to make this with fake data. And at that point, once you have the working API, your own API, some real API out there, you would be able to consume it and to create a page out of this. This is the purpose of today. So Alessia, I think we can have a couple of minutes for questions, for Q&A, and then we may have a little break, okay?
Yes,
10 minutes of
definitely.
break. And then we are jumping back on VS Code and try to make some things out. So, any question, folks?
Don't be shy.
I really don't have any question. I just want to congratulate with you, because the explanation has been really clear. Also for a totally newbie about this kind of protocol. You express everything, but in easy words. I was just wondering what will be the homework I have to do. I was really focused on that. So what will be the obstacle for tomorrow?
Well, thank you, Tommaso, first and foremost. And yeah, as you can imagine, this scenario opens up a lot of possibility, because right now you are just you will be able to actually contact the internet out there and getting information. So yeah, I think the homework will be something about creating a web page out of some endpoint. Okay, it will focus on the second part of this lesson after the break. And of course, we are rushing things out. As you can imagine, this is a really fast bootcamp. If you have, I hope I will be clear enough. You will be able to watch the recordings if you want, as many times as you want, and hopefully you will be able to successfully commit your homework. Let's resume from where we left. So we just saw Postman, basically a client application that will mimic an HTTP request and hopefully receive a response back. So that is very useful in several ways. Okay, you can use it as a backender in order to test your endpoints without having to build a page for that. You can try to see if your requests from the browser are going as expected. Okay, you can mimic a browser in order to make a request and see what are the headers you need to specify, or various cases. Okay. It's very important, at least, to understand what is it for. Okay, for mimic and faking HTTP request and see what are we getting back without having to set up a whole page for it and without having to set up JavaScript code for it. Okay, right now in the second part of this lesson, where is it? No, this one. Yeah, and right now, what we are going to see is basically just one sec. Yeah, okay. We are going to see how to translate that HTTP request back in the code. Okay, so what we are going to do now is creating a very simple web page. We are going to see how to make a request in JavaScript and use the response we are getting back from the endpoint. Okay, this is what we want to do right now. This is what we hope. And we can make, so the purpose is understand how to make a HTTP request in JavaScript. We are going to explore the world of AJAX for this. As I was explaining before, AJAX is basically a technology that allows you to dynamically fetch data, make HTTP request, receive HTTP response in your page, in your code, and work with the data. Okay, without having to reload the page, without having to press F5 in the browser. Basically, just from the code, retrieve analyze the response we are getting from the server, and if everything went well, probably display the content in some form. Otherwise, we can provide an error message. Okay, we can provide a notification for the user that maybe he's not authorized for doing that operation, that maybe data is not back because there is no data to ask for. Okay, the query didn't went well, so we can actually try to inform our user in case of an error. Okay, so this is just done performing a request and analyzing the response in JavaScript. Yeah, for many, AJAX is a developer dream. You can read data, send data after the page is loaded, okay, dynamically, upon user click, upon interaction, programmatically, whenever you want, basically. And manipulate the content of the page in the way we saw last week without the need of reloading the page. Okay, just analyzing the code and manipulating the DOM. And we can also provide some I don't know, you have a form to compile in order to do a registration, in order to send some data. We can perform that request and receive, hopefully, let's say a 201, okay, if you want to create new data and inform the user that everything went well, for example, without the need of reloading the page, without the need of opening a new tab. Everything is done inside the same viewport you are already in, basically. The magic of AJAX and the HTTP request world is done with the async await pattern. What is the async await pattern? So in a sentence, not in a sentence, at a glance, what is the problem with the request of remote data? Okay, let's say you are in Berlin. Okay, you have a 1 gigabit fiber internet connection in your home. Okay, and you actually open Facebook. What happens? Facebook is instantaneously loaded. You are getting back all the data in a split second, and the page loads really fast. Okay. This is the perfect scenario. Nobody lives like this. Usually, you are living with a simple ADSL connection, a simple fiber connection. Most civilized country has really fast mobile network connection. Okay, this is also a really good use case scenario. But you have to think about some other people that maybe are not so lucky and may not have the fastest internet connection. Okay, so if your Facebook page loads in a split second, somewhere around the world, a user is experiencing 10 seconds for loading the Facebook page, okay, because their data plan is very slow compared to yours. And so what is the problem here? You need to provide a method that works asynchronously. You need to provide a request for the data that is asynchronous. Why is that? Because you know when it's going to start, but you don't know when it's going to end, right? It may take a split second for retrieve the data. It may need 10 seconds to retrieve the data. So it's up to you to code your page in a way that is not blocking, okay? The page should not freeze while you are waiting for the data to come, but you should not expect as well that data is coming instantaneously, just like in your home, in your local fiber home connection, okay? You need to provide your HTTP calls in a manner that is asynchronous, that is not blocking the other interactions with the page, and it is actually waiting for the request to complete before showing the data. Otherwise, you are trying to show data that is not here yet, right? You need to wait for the data, and you need then to work with the data. basically. And this is exactly why we will learn and will use the async await pattern, because the operation we perform will be asynchronous. Will not be asynchronous. So a synchronous operation is an operation that instantaneously executes itself. Okay, it's an operation that in a split second finishes. An asynchronous operation is an operation that starts, but you don't know when it's going to end. And we need this kind of approach in order to work with remote data, because we need to make application that works with a 1 gigabit fiber connection, and we need to make application that work with a 2G network in the middle of the desert. Okay, this is what modern internet development is: creating an application that works wherever and allow data to actually come whenever it's ready. Yeah, this is why we use async await, because some operations could take some time. Okay, we don't know in advance how much time it's going to take. Because maybe it's a problem with us, we are in the middle of the desert, or maybe there is an internet problem wherever the server is placed. Okay, so the data is slow to come back. Or maybe we are not working with the fastest storage mechanism available, okay? And so it may take some tens of milliseconds in order to get data out from wherever we are storing it, okay? So there are several variables in place here that determines the speed of our page. And in order to be completely optimized and to give a great user experience to your user, you need to provide an asynchronous call for this. You need to say, okay, you know what? Let's wait for this to come back, but let's not block the page. Let's not wait for the operation to come back before showing the page. Okay, you will show the page, and after the page is being loaded, you will perform your asynchronous operation. Because you want to immediately to present something to the user in order to tell him, okay, your page is right here, but the content is still to come. And so at that point, you will make your asynchronous call and wait for the data to come back. And then you can populate your page with the data you were asking for, basically. So as you can see, several steps are being made, and we need to provide a method that is not blocking our page, that it is not frustrating our user while they are waiting for the data to come back. The async await pattern does just like that. Yeah, this is a very, very complex topic. Okay, before talking about async await, if you want to cover all the theory behind it, you need to know what a promise is. You need to know what a callback is, what is the problems with callbacks and promises, and yeah, there are several. We can speak probably a week about this. If you want in a full stack course, I speak over a week about this. But yeah, right now we have 1 hour, and so let's jump right into it. So in a sentence, we need to write asynchronous functions, okay, for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And in order to create asynchronous functions, we need to use the async and await keyword inside our code. Await is a keyword that will basically wait for the response of a remote operation before moving on. Okay, we are treating our asynchronous code just like it was synchronous, basically. This is the magic of the async await keyword. It will become much clearer once we step into the code, okay? But right now, async await is actually a pattern for treating this asynchronous operation just like a synchronous one, because in our code, we want to execute line by line, basically. And with asynchronous stuff, this can be a challenge. And as you can see, if we declare our function as async, we will be able later on to use the await in order to wait for the result of a remote operation to end before moving on. This is why we are doing this, because otherwise result here will not be present, okay? Because result is an asynchronous operation, and so the line after it, we still don't have it, This is the problem, okay? I will show the problem in the real code in a second, but basically an asynchronous operation is an operation that is going to start, but it's not going to, you are not yet know where it's going to finish because of the problems I spoke earlier. And so we need a way for actually move on step by step in our code. And async await does exactly that. The operation, the method we are going to use in order to do to provide the get method, to perform a remote request in JavaScript from a couple of revisions by now is called fetch. Okay. Fetch is a JavaScript method that allows us to perform this HTTP request we spoke all evening about. Okay, if you want to translate all the concepts, all the Postman HTTP requests we saw earlier, we need to use the fetch method in JavaScript. It's the same thing. Okay, if you want a word for translate that into code, it's fetch. Fetch is a method for sending an HTTP request and waiting for a response to come back. Just an example. The call I made earlier translate in this simple line of code. Fetch passing the URL as the first parameter. Okay, fetch is the method, open parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we are providing the only mandatory parameter for fetch, which is the only mandatory parameter in every HTTP request, which is, if you remember, the URL, the address, the recipient, the place we want to contact, the endpoint we want to contact. This will send an HTTP GET and will get, hopefully, back a response from the server. It's an asynchronous method. Fetch is an asynchronous method because it's technically it returns a promise. A promise is an asynchronous object in JavaScript. So fetch is not executed in a split second. Okay, it may be, but we don't know. It can be a month long. Well, not a month long. At some point we will reach a timeout, but it can be 10 seconds long, for example. Okay, we know where we are going to start. We don't know where we are going to finish. We should await for getting a response, and this is why we use the await keyword. In the last line here, as you can see, we are prepending the await keyword, the await keyword, not keyboard, the await keyword before fetch. Fetch is the asynchronous method. We want to await for it, okay, to wait the end of it in order to get the response back from the APIs. And what are we getting back? Well, we are getting back the response, right? We are performing a request, we are getting back the response. And the response is an object, is a JavaScript object containing all the stuff I was talking before. It's containing the body of the response, so the actual data. It's containing the status code, 200, 301, 404, whatever. It's containing the headers of the response. Okay, it's containing everything I was talking about before in a single object, which is the response. So the return value of my fetch method, from my fetch HTTP request, basically. We are performing the request with the fetch. The result, the return value of this method is the response itself. Again, I won't stress this never enough. It's an asynchronous method. And so if we try to see the result straight after it, we will not be able to do so. I will show you in the code in a second. We need to wait for it. Otherwise, the code will go on, and we do not have the return value straight away because it's not a synchronous operation; it's an asynchronous one. Okay, enough talking. Any question, or can I jump straight into the code?
Just a curiosity.
Yeah.
You underline the fact that we need to create async and wait in order to the fact that there are data that go through. But it's not also related to the fact that JavaScript is synchronous languages. So yeah. Also, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Because as any programming languages, we are moving line by line, right? The JavaScript interpreter will start from the top and read line by line. What is the problem? I will show you it in a second. If we go line by line without waiting for this asynchronous operation to complete, the interpreter will go on, basically. And we are trying to reach some data that is coming some milliseconds after that, and we don't have the data yet. But this is exactly the problem. Thank you, Tommaso. We are going to see it straight away. Let's create in the desktop, or wherever you want, if you want to code along with me, a simple folder. Let's call it week 3. Week 3. Yeah, we are in week 3. Let's open it. This will be a little bigger, I swear. So let's create an index.html file. Okay, this will be our basic index HTML file. And let's provide a simple template for creating a page, okay, an HTML page. If you are in VS Code, you can just type HTML:5, and this will trigger an emmet script that will basically create a basic template for us, okay? I just typed HTML.5, okay, if you are interested. Typing this and pressing enter will create an HTML5 template out of this. This is very convenient. Okay, we already have our template. I hope you can see this. So let's give this a name, okay? Let's call it async await, just for giggles. And in the body, let's create just a placeholder. Let's create an h1, the classic hello world, okay? Hello world, and this is our body. Let's test this out. In order to test this, I will right-click on it, and I will open with live server. Live server, I don't know if you spoke this about before. Live server is an extension. Okay, you can find in the marketplace of VS Code. And this will basically auto-reload our browser whenever we make a change in the code. Okay, everything works as expected. I have my title here, and I have my h1. Okay, great. So the next step, okay, we don't have the fav icon, which is declared somewhere. Don't worry about it. Okay, it went away. Great. So a simple page. What about creating now these asynchronous calls? Okay, let's create a fetch method. Let's use the fetch method for creating an HTTP request. For doing that, I will create a script tag just before the end of my body tag, basically. And you can put the script tag here. You can put it in the head. Several way of thoughts here. I prefer doing at the end of the body. And in the script, I want to create a function that will perform this exact same call I was making before, okay, to the JSON placeholder website. And in order to do this, I will overwrite a basic function that you may encounter a lot if you do DOM manipulation, which is called window onload. So it's the onload method attached to the window. The window is the browser itself, okay, in this case. And we can overwrite this onload method, providing our code, okay, basically. This is some pieces of code that will run automatically once the page has finished loading, basically, okay? So this will run every time my page has been reloaded. Okay. So if I put, for example, here a console log, okay, console log loaded, I putting this inside this window onload, which again is, as you can see, VS Code is telling us that this is basically a function, okay? This is a method attached to the window object. We can override this and run our own code, basically, every time the page reloads. And as you can see, we can already see it. So every time I press the refresh browser, I'm executing that code, okay? I'm seeing loaded here in the console because I'm console logged inside the window onload. Great, this is the perfect place for doing our remote request. How can we do this? Well, we can just create a variable, okay, for example, let's call it response, because this variable will hold the response of our HTTP request. And this will be equal to the return value of my fetch, okay? So fetch is actually, you can just say fetch, okay? This is an embedded JavaScript method we can use straight from VS Code. And as you can see, it's taking several parameters, two parameters. The first is mandatory, and the second is not mandatory, is optional, because we have a question mark here. And so in order to make this method work, we at least need to provide this parameter called input. Input is basically the URL, okay? The thing I was talking about before. Every request must at least have the pointing, the address, the recipient. And this is the URL we want to contact. Okay, so here I will just put, you guess it, let's go back in Postman. I will just grab this. We were working with posts, if I remember correctly. So let's copy this. Let's copy this and paste it inside my fetch. Okay. Okay. Okay, great. So my I cannot spell response tonight. Response is equal to fetch this thing right here, right? This previously in Postman, this was returning me, if you remember, an array of 100 objects. Each one of those was a single post, right? With the title, the content, the text, whatever. And let's see. So if I now console log the response, I should be able to fetch those, to see the response back, right? Because I'm performing a fetch, and later on I'm assigning it to a variable, and then I want to see what I gave, what the response gave me, basically, what the server gave me. So I'm just console logging a hello message, a loaded message. Then I'm performing a remote fetch. This is all you need, by the way, for performing a fetch, okay? And we are saving the result. So the response object we are getting back in a variable conveniently called response. And we are seeing what we got back, basically, okay? Let's run this and see what we are getting. Where is the browser? Right here. Okay. So the loaded message is still there. Of course, it will be there every time I load the page. And after it, I should see the result of my fetch, right, to do a response. What is the problem? This is not what I'm hoping to see. This is not what I was expecting for. This is an object that is in a status of pending, okay? Pending means, just like what I said before, that this is as an asynchronous operation, and this fetch did not come back yet, basically. If I try to see in an instant after my fetch what I'm getting back, I'm not seeing the result yet, because this is an asynchronous operation. This operation is it's not yet ended here. Okay, this may take a split second, this may take 10 seconds, but coding with this kind of style, we are getting into troubles, okay? Because right now, response is not holding the response. The response is not finished. We are getting something that is pending, that is not finished. And this is the problem. So we need to fix this, okay? We need to wait for this to complete and then console log it, basically, because otherwise we are not finding anything helpful out of this request. And so the only thing you need to do is to remember that every time you work with an asynchronous method, you need to put the await keyword here, okay? Await means, okay, you know what? This assignment must wait for this asynchronous operation to finish before moving on. And now response will hold the value, because now, before moving on this, I will wait for this remote operation to end, basically. And now this is going to be ended. Okay, right now at line 15, response is what I'm expecting to receive, because response is got assigned just when the operation has been completed, basically. And what is the catch with all of this is that for using the await keyword inside a function, you need to specify that function as asynchronous. If I don't put this here, my code will crash, because it's telling me await is only valid into async functions, asynchronous functions. And so await is perfect, but I also need to provide async here. Okay, so I'm declaring the function as asynchronous, and then I'm allowed to use await into it. And with this, as you can see, response is a complete different thing now, and this is holding what we were expecting. We will see the content in a second, but did you get it? In order to get something useful, the line after my fetch, I need to wait for that fetch to finish. And for allow that fetch to finish, I need to put the await keyword beforehand, before the function, because this function actually is returning a promise. And a promise in JavaScript is an asynchronous operation, and we need to wait for that before moving on. And the last catch is that for using the await keyword, you need to write async before for declaring the function, basically. Okay, so without this async, I'm not allowed to use await, and without the await, response now is not the response. It's actually something that has not finished yet. This is the summing up of everything I wrote here. And now, waiting for the response to come back, I can explore it. And as you can see, I'm getting the famous status code. Okay, I'm getting 200 as a property of this object I got back. I'm getting the URL I was asking about. I'm getting the headers. Okay, this response doesn't have any headers, but if it would have, I will get them here. And I also received the body. Okay, the body is actually the list of posts. So the 100 posts we were seeing in Postman. We have a slight problem here, but we will get to this in a second, and it will be very easy to fix. But did you grasp it? Did you get it? This is how you operate with the modern standard, with the latest syntax on asynchronous operations, waiting for them to finish before moving on. This is a kind of syntax that actually allows you to write your asynchronous code just like it was synchronous, okay? Line after line, moving on and waiting for remote and expensive operation to finish before moving on. This is why we use await and the async keyword here. So in a glance, this is how you do it, okay? Any question?
Yes, we have one from Stephanie.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, is there any website that does not use the async await?
So async await is something you need to provide on your own. Okay, every website works the same. Every website will take some time in order to give you the results back, right? It may be a server in your basement, it may be a server in Thailand, wherever. It will need some time in order to fulfill the information, to give the information back to you. And so you need to provide your code for this. You need to provide the async await pattern or other patterns in order to wait for that response to finish. Otherwise, you are not writing good code, unfortunately. You are not waiting for the response properly, and you may end up with unexpected results, okay? This is not something that a website is providing. This is a coding approach. This is one of the latest coding approach to solve this problem, because as you can imagine, this problem is ancient as the internet is, because internet is all about remote operations, and we need to provide a way of waiting for these asynchronous methods to end before moving on. And this is one of the most concise and, in my opinion, clean methods of doing this. This is what we are teaching in the full stack development course. As the end result, we are analyzing better in a better way the problem, but this is the solution at the end we provide. okay? Because in my opinion, this is the most modern way of solving this problem. Okay, this is probably the most difficult part, okay? From now, it's downhill. So strive with me a little more. We are 30 minutes away from the end of this lesson, and let's just move on and create some content out of this, okay? So now my response is complete, okay? You can also see you can also see it in another way if, again, you go into your Chrome developer tools or Firefox developer tools, whatever browser you're using, you will always find a network tab inside of it, okay? And this network tab is very cool. It allows you to see every remote call your application is doing. If you see, when I refresh the page, a call has been made. And the name is actually the endpoint we are contacting, okay? So the latest piece, the latest chunk after the latest slash. And this is the post call we are making. And as you can see, you can find all kinds of information here. If you navigate into the headers, you will see what is the request URL you provide and what is the response you are getting back, basically. You can really dive into every single header, every single property you are getting back and forth, basically, from the server. And in the preview, you're actually seeing that we are getting results back. Okay, this is the body of the response. This is exactly the list of posts we were seeing into Postman. Now we are with the line of code, we are getting that response back into the browser. Basically, we are performing the same operation with just one line of code, and we are getting these records back. Okay, every one of these objects in the array contains a post. Just like in Postman, okay, these are the same. This is the array of the response. These are the posts we are getting back, and in the browser, these are exactly the same. Okay, so we are successfully retrieving the list of our posts. As a matter of fact, in your console, in the response, as you can see in the body, yeah, we are getting the body, but we are not getting the posts in just yet. Okay, because as you can see, the body is in a form of readable stream. Okay, so this is the response object. It contains everything, the status code, the headers, and the list of posts, but the body itself is not immediately available to us because the body is a stream right now. In the response object you are getting back from an endpoint, whenever you are contacting an endpoint, the body will not be already converted into a usable format. It will be a stream, okay? It's a stream you can read. This is why it's called readable stream. So it's in a form that is not immediately usable. It's in a form you need to convert it into an object, basically, in order to provide the list of posts you were expecting to get, okay? And for doing that, you will need another method, basically. And that method is called JSON, basically. So you can, the response here, so let response, right now we are getting the response back, right? We now want to use the body of that response. And we need basically to do this. We can use and convert this response into a usable object in order to successfully use its body. Let's create another variable called posts. Okay, so posts is actually a variable that hopefully will hold our array of posts, right? So the converted object inside into a usable format. So in order to convert the response body into a usable array of objects, we need to do this. We need to do response and use a method called JSON. So JSON as a word, as you can, if you remember, in JavaScript lingo, it means an object. okay? And JSON, it's also the name of a method that will convert the body of the response you got back into an object, into a usable format, okay? So this will convert the body of the response into an array of objects, which is exactly what we want to have right now, because we want to work with that array of objects. And so posts right now, hopefully will hold the body of our call, okay, the body of our response, so the array of posts. Let's see if that's the case. So console log posts. Let's see what we are getting. We are getting another infamous promise pending, because JSON as well is an asynchronous method, unfortunately. So response.json, if you can see, JSON again is returning an object of type promise. And so in order for doing this, we need to put the await keyword even here. So let's recap this a little bit. Response is a variable holding the response of our request. Okay, this is the request. We need to await for it because we know when it starts, but we don't know when it ends. So the page will actually wait for that object to be successfully got back. And then we got the response. So the response now is an object containing everything about the things we are getting back from the server. The line after that, we are trying to convert this response, the body of this response, into an usable object, because it's a readable string, right? So we need to convert it into an array of objects, into some JavaScript data structure, basically. And so for doing that, we are actually transforming the response itself, JSONifying it, basically, using the JSON on the body of that response. And so we are converting that into an object. The only catch is that this as well, the JSON method, is an asynchronous operation, just like fetch. Both of these are asynchronous operation. So if we just try to console log the line after it or use it the line after, the page will crash, because we at line 17, without the await keyword, do not have right now the converted object yet. We have a promise that is pending, that has not been fulfilled yet. And so we need, for using these posts, the line right after, we need to provide the await keyword. This await keyword will wait for this JSONification of the response to be finished before moving on, basically. And so right now, this assignment will work just when this operation has been fulfilled, just when the promise has finished. And so now posts as the array of posts. And if we put the await keyword here and we try to do the same thing again, so console log in the posts, you will see that right now we are getting the list of posts. Okay, and now all these are usable objects. Usable object inside a giant array that is holding all the 100 objects we are getting back from our endpoint. And so all of this, what is this? Where is it? Okay, all of these lines are actually useful, okay, apart from the console log. But we need to declare our fetch with the await keyword, and this will assign the response of our fetch in a usable object. And then for using the body of it, we need to JSONify this fetch, this response, okay? And that will give us back the array of posts, basically. So these are the chain of operation. You want to perform a remote fetch, you want to wait for that to finish, and the response you are getting back is made of several properties. For getting the body, you need to JSONifying it and get the data back. This is in a glance what you need to do. As if you can see, it's just 2 lines of code, okay? But understanding why they are so useful, why they are needed, and why the await keyword is needed is crucial, because both of these are asynchronous operation. We need to use the await keyword for waiting them to finish before moving on. And for using the await keyword, we need to declare our function as asynchronous. And right now at line 17, we are greeted with a full array of objects. And so now it's just a matter of putting in place whatever you learned last week. So manipulating our page after it's been loaded, after the fact, and populate our page with our posts, and we are done. So, excited? What do you think about this? Any questions so far?
Yes, Stefano, we have a little questions really on the chat. Maybe you can take a look. It's gonna be
okay.
Easier,
Let me see. Okay, yeah. So, is it safe to say we need to use await with fetch and the JSON method many times? So most of the times you want to retrieve so most of the time, or the times you will perform a fetch, you will probably need the data, okay? You are performing a fetch for getting the data back, right? And so, yeah, these two steps will be very, you will perform these steps very often because these are the minimum steps required for getting the data back. So yeah, this is the normal procedure for fetching data and use that data in your page. So yeah. Can you repeat why we do need to await the response to JSON? Because the JSON method is an asynchronous method. It's just like fetch. It's not done in an instant. It's not instantaneous. This, depending of the length of the body, this may take a millisecond. This may take 10 milliseconds, okay? So you don't know it in advance. You need to wait for this to finish because otherwise you are getting, again, something that is not finished. You are getting back a response that is pending yet, that is still not finished. And so everything, so as a rule of thumb, every time you work with a method and you hover onto it and you see that it's returning a promise, you be sure that you will need the await keyword, because promise, if you Google it on Google, you will see that it's a JavaScript object. It's a JavaScript type of object that is meaning of an asynchronous operation. And so every time you work with promises as the return value of a method, you want to use the await keyword. And if you hover JSON, you will find as well that it is a promise. Okay, so you will need to wait this as well. Exactly. Say JSON is an asynchronous operation. We need to provide to tell the code, the JavaScript interpreter, to stop, to wait, okay, before moving on. Otherwise, it will just go on assuming everything is a synchronous operation. But these are not the case. Okay, great. Absolutely. So right now, we are getting some data back. Okay, let's just have a single word about the fetch. Okay, we have done everything we need to get data back. What about if we need to perform, I don't know, if we need to perform another method? Okay, if we need to perform a post, or if we need to provide some headers in our request, okay, for authorization as well. If you remember, some endpoints work just with an authorization. So we need to provide a proof to the server that we are authorized for doing this particular operation. How can we do this? How can we use the fetch method providing this additional stuff? Well, again, it's just a matter of hovering fetch. And as you can see, fetch actually allows two parameters. The first one is mandatory. And again, it's the URL we want to contact, okay? Just like we did with the JSON placeholder URL. And this is if you are performing a fetch, a simple fetch, this is all we need, okay? This works right now. But maybe you are contacting an endpoint that requires authorization or that requires some other kind of header. And so what you will work with is the second parameter, which is called init. Okay, this is just an internal keyword for it. You don't have to name it. Of course, it's just a parameter of a function, and you will need to provide this if you need to provide additional information, like a header, like another method. Okay, not the get, which is the default one, but maybe a put, a post. And so to provide this additional information, it's just a matter of writing a comma and provide this second parameter. Okay, and the second parameter in these fetch calls is an object. So the second parameter will be wrapped inside these curly braces because it's an object. And you can provide additional stuff here. For example, if you need to perform a post and not a get, for example, you will need to provide a method of post inside this object. Okay, so this is working for performing post calls, for creating new data, if you remember. Okay, post is just all about creating new stuff. And as well, you can, I don't know, provide headers. Okay, headers are again another object. And so headers will be, I don't know, something like authorization and this is my out token or something like this. Okay, this is a string that you can set up to provide some kind of authorization for your call. So all of these are part of the second object of the fetch call, of the fetch method, I'm sorry, which is the options called the initialization options, call it whatever you want. This is the additional metadata for our call. Okay, as you saw, for performing a simple fetch, which implies a get method, this is writing get. This is the implicit way. Okay, if you are not providing a method, fetch will use get. But if you want to use post, put, delete, whatever, you will need to provide it explicitly. And you need to provide it in the second object, which is the options for this request. So this is just in a glance how to provide additional info about your request. Okay, and as well, if you writing a post, you will probably need to provide a body. Okay, again, post is for creating new resources. So for example, you will provide a body of, I don't know, username, and you provide an email address and a super secret password for your resource to be created. Okay, you will need to provide this in order to successfully create a resource. Otherwise, without the body, the server wouldn't know what to create, right? So for some kind of request, you need the body. And this is all part of the options object. Right now, we don't need to provide any options in our call, so we can safely skip this. And our fetch will just work with the first parameter, which is the only mandatory one, which is the URL. Okay. And now in our page, we are seeing that we are getting back some posts. Okay. And the last step we need to take is to actually work with this kind of posts. Okay. Let's see if we have some slides to show about this. So the fetch options is just like what I just told. Okay, so you can provide your own method, you can provide your own headers, you can provide your body if you want, the body of the request. This will hold some information useful for creating the resource, for editing it. It depends on what you need to do. Okay, for simple fetches, for getting data for JSON placeholder website, you don't need any options. You just need to provide the URL and that's it. Because the default method for any fetch call is the get, which is useful for retrieving data back. And the default address is an empty object, the default body is an empty object. So yeah, all the defaults are just empty stuff. Okay, for retrieving simple data, you just need to provide the URL and you are done. And we just had a demo for that. Okay, and this is regarding the JSONification of the response. Okay, again, let's recap this. If we are getting back our response, in order to transform the data we want to get back from an endpoint into a usable object, we need to use the JSON method, right? And we need to provide the await keyword also for the JSON, before the JSON method, because JSON is an asynchronous method. It will return a promise. We need to wait for that to finish before moving on. After doing this, we can actually do something with the data. Okay, now it's the part of is the part of using the data. Okay, we got our array of objects back, and now comes the funny part. We need to do something with the data. And we can use it to fill our page. We are using AJAX. We do not need to refresh the page after we got the data. We just use the data for manipulating the page and filling it up with data, with our posts, for example, or with an array of books, with an array of comments, whatever. It's the same. Data in JavaScript is data. For example, we can do something like this, okay? We can cycle through our array of objects from the first one to the last one, and for every one of these objects, we can create a simple div, a simple card, a simple span, whatever, and put it out on a page, for example. And this is exactly what we are going to do right now. So in our page, now we have the posts to work with, okay? Let's create just a very, very simple page out of these posts. How would you do that? Let me see the question. How do we introduce a async method if we don't use page lifecycle window method? Oh, well, it's just a matter of declaring your function as asynchronous, okay? For example, you can just say function. So you have several ways of declaring functions, okay? You can say function do something. This will do, okay? And if you want this to be asynchronous, you just have to prepend async before it, okay? This will declare your function as asynchronous. If you are most used to ES6, so the latest syntax of JavaScript, you can also say const do something equals an arrow function. Okay, this is another way of declaring a function. And in this case, you want to prepend async here. So just before the parentheses. Okay, this is a couple of ways you can declare functions in JavaScript, and you can prepend async in the declaration of the function, okay, just like I did here. These are standalone functions that are declared as asynchronous. Okay, so now we have our posts, and it would be nice to actually fill my page up with these posts, right? And so for do something with every post, the better thing to do is to cycle through them, to create a for loop and to provide operation for each one, every single one of them. So we know how to perform a for loop. Let's do just that. So for let x that start from x. I'm a little tired. From let x equals to 0, that start from 0. And x will actually always be less than post.length, okay? And x plus plus. So this is a basic for loop. We are starting from the index of 0. We are ending when we reach the end of the array. And we are incrementing our counter of 1 every time. Okay, so the first cycle x will be 0, the second cycle x will be 1, and so on and so forth, until we reach the actual length minus 1 of the post array, basically. So let's create a post out of it. So a post, a div with the text and title, okay? So for example, let's create an element out of each one of these posts. So let post equal document.create element, and we are going to create a div out of each one of these posts, okay? You covered this stuff last week. In line 31 here, I'm just creating an empty div, so an empty div tag for each one of these posts, okay? So remember, inside your for loop, you want to address a single post, okay? So these are the stuff you will do for each post every time. So for each one of my 100 posts, I will create a div. And with this post, I can actually manipulate it a little bit, okay? So this is an empty div right now. Let's add a class to it. So let's work with the class list method of the post object, and let's add a new class. I want to add a class called single post. Okay, so now my empty div actually has a class. So it will be a div with a class of single post. Remember, this is just in memory now. We didn't append it anywhere in the page. This is just in our dreams. Okay, we will need later on to append it actually in the page. So this is a single post, and now I want to fill this empty div. Now it's empty. I need to fill it up with the information of the post. Okay, so every post. Let me go back into Chrome. Every post, as you can see here, has a body, which is the text, so the body itself, and has a title. Okay, I want just to create a simple visual element with the title and the text, and this will be filled with the title and the body of each one of these posts, basically. Let's go back in VS Code. Okay, so for filling my div, filling up my div with content, I will use something called inner HTML, which is a property that will add pretty much some content into my div. Okay, so I want to append to the current HTML of my div. I just created it, so it's empty right now. I want to create, let's say, a simple title. Okay, so I will create an h3 tag, and inside this h3, I will fill with the current post dot title. Okay, so let me finish this, and then we are going to close this tag. And what am I doing here? So so at line 31, I'm creating an empty div. Okay, so it will be something like, this is what I created. Okay, an empty div element. I'm creating an element which is an empty div. Later on in line 33, I'm saying add a class to this div. Okay, add a class of single post. Okay, great. So now my empty div is now something like this. Single post. Okay, so these are the steps, line by line, what we are doing. We are creating an empty div. We are appending a class of single post to my empty div. So my div now is yet empty, already it's empty, just like before, but now I have a class. Okay, a class of single post. This will be useful later on because we want to apply a little styling on this. So I need to provide a selector, to provide a class in order to be able to select it afterwards. Okay, now I'm actually working with the content of the div. Okay, it's empty right now. It does not have any content right now. I need to provide the content. And so inside my div, I will create an h3 tag, which contains the title of the current post. Okay, I'm cycling through every post. So I'm performing this operation for each one of the posts. And so for getting the current post, I'm using posts of X. Posts is the array of all the posts, okay? Is this thing right here, is the whole array. So if in the first cycle, I'm going to take, so because X is 0, I will take posts of 0 title. So in the first cycle, this will be the title of my post. In the second cycle, it will create a new div and will take the index of 1. So it will skip this, will take this post, this title. And the third cycle will take the second index, and we go with this title, and so on and so forth. So this is dynamic, okay? Depending of which cycle we are in, this is going to take a different post and take the title of that particular post. Okay, so right now, my div is something like this, single post, and this will actually contain an h3, okay, with some text inside of it, basically. Let's format this a little better. Okay. So this is my div, okay? I have a div with a class of single post, and I've injected into its HTML as a child, my h3 with the title of the current post. Okay, great. And the last thing we need to do, so not the last thing, the next thing we need to do is to fill this with also the text, so the body of the post. Okay, now we are filling it with the title. Next step is to also provide the body. And the body will not be an h3 tag. It will be just, I think, a simple paragraph will do. And so we need to say post inner HTML plus equal. Again, we are adding to the current content of the post something else, which now is a paragraph, okay? And this will take every time the body of the current post. So it will be posts.x, so a reference to the current element we are cycling, and body will, the body property will hold the text of it. And now we can just simply close the tag, and that will do. Okay, so now again, let's as a reference take this again. Now I'm actually adding a P here with a longer text, because this is not the head, the title, this is the body. Let's suppose it's a little longer. And now we are adding a paragraph, okay? So this is step by step what I'm doing with my element. I'm creating it from scratch, and then I'm filling it up with properties and with content. Right now, my post is pretty much complete, okay? I have a single post here, a div with an h3, a paragraph. And the only problem is that now, until now, this div is not present in the page, right? We created it, we fill it up with properties, but we didn't append it yet into the page. We need to, as you know, because the page, the DOM itself is structured like a tree, we need to append it somewhere, just like when you appended a Christmas ball to a Christmas tree, okay? We need to append it to a specific part of the page in order this to be shown into the page. And so this is just in memory right now. The only thing we need to do is to provide a place for it. And so let's just create an empty section in my page that will later gets filled with my posts. So let's create a div, and let's give this this div an ID so I can reference it. Post section. Okay, so I created a div with an ID of post section, and this is empty. Okay, this does not contain anything yet. As a matter of fact, my page is identical just like before. I have my elements here, I'm manipulating them, but I'm not appending this into the page yet, okay? I have my section here, which is still empty. So post section, as you can see, this is completely empty, okay? This is not present in the page, this is empty. So let's, after we created the post, why not append this one and all the later that has yet to come into this post section. Okay, I want my posts, which is this thing right here, right now, to be injected into here. And so my post section will be actually filled with posts. Okay, this is similar to the stuff you did last week when you were manipulating the DOM, but now we are manipulating the DOM with real data that is coming from out of the blue, okay, from the internet. Okay, so I just need now to create a reference of that particular empty div, the post section div, and append my posts one after the other. Okay, it's really simple. Let me show you how you can do it. I will just create a reference to my section here. So I need a pointer. I need a reference to see, okay, this is a reference in code to this particular portion of the page. And so I can call a method called append onto it in order to fill it up with my divs, with my single posts. And because I want this to be done just one time, I don't want to apply this reference every time I create an element, because the reference will be always the same. I just need to create it beforehand, okay, before the for loop. And let's create it. post section reference. Okay, again, you can call it whatever you want, just to remind me that this is a reference to this particular post section. I'm calling it post section reference. And this will be document dot get element by ID. Get element by ID is a method, is a JavaScript method that will return to you a reference to a particular portion of the page. Okay, which portion is up to you. You have to provide in this specific method the ID of the DOM element you want to reference to. Okay, that's why it's called get element by ID. So because I've conveniently said that this div has an ID of post section, I can just say as a parameter post section here. Okay, so now this variable actually holds a reference to my page. Okay, this is going to be a reference in code to my div of post section. Why am I doing this? Because right now I can say post section reference, so take that particular portion of the page and append something to it. Okay, actually the method is called append child because I want to append something as a child of it. And imagine what I can append to it. I will just append my post that initially was empty, an empty div, and later on has been filled up with my data. And now I just appending it to the page. So I'm taking the ID, the div with an ID of post section, okay, my post section reference, and I'm appending something to it. I'm appending my post. And to answer your question, Will, yes, absolutely. You can also use other documents method for targeting a specific portion of the page. Just like you said, another way of doing this will be using query selector. Okay, query selector is another method, more generic, to get a reference of an element in the page. Okay, and because query selector actually works just like the CSS selectors, this is not valid anymore. You don't have to provide the ID. You have to provide a specific CSS query, and so because we are referencing an ID, you have to put the hashtag. Okay, because hashtag in CSS is the selector for an ID. So these lines are absolutely interchangeable. If you want my opinion on it, this is slightly faster, okay? Because this method is already expecting an ID. And so this method does not have to parse your query in order to understand what you want to do, because this can be very expensive, this can be very long. And so query selector has some logic in place to parse it beforehand. And while get element by ID is much faster because it already knows that we are pointing to an ID, so it will just look up the ID of the elements in the page instead of actually parsing this up and understanding what you are trying to do. Query selector is more useful because it's very powerful and you can provide a very, very long query string into it if you want to target a specific element in the page. But because here we are just referring a simple div with the convenient ID, probably get element ID is faster here. But yeah, you are right. This is working as well. This is just a little more expensive, okay? Okay, so let's see if we are getting something in our page and then we can go back into the code. Okay, so we are getting somewhere, okay? These are posts. There are 100 of them actually, because we are cycling every element of the for loop, creating a div and appending to the page. And as you can see, now my post section is not empty anymore. We appended elements into it, and we appended div with a class of single post. Okay, let's recap what we did. So we got a reference to this empty div. Okay, this div by definition is empty. Okay, when we create the page, it's actually empty. If you refresh the page, you can see, I don't know if you can see it, but for a split second, the page is empty. I hope you can see this. And immediately we are performing the fetch, waiting for these results. As you can see, we are waiting for the response to come, but this is very quick. Okay, we are talking about milliseconds here. And so we are getting a reference with this of this div, which initially is empty. And later on, with our response, so let's start from the beginning. As the first line of code here, we are waiting for the result, for the response of a fetch, pointing to this particular endpoint. Later on, we are converting this response into using the JSON method into, so we are converting the body of this response into a usable object, because the body itself is not usable right off the way. Okay, you need to convert it into an object. So we are using a method called JSON, which again is asynchronous, and so we need to put the await keyword here as well. Then I'm getting a reference to my initially empty section here, which will hold later on all my posts. And okay, we are getting the reference, and now it's just a matter, because my body is made of an array of posts, okay, an array of 100 posts, I can cycle through this array of posts. These are 100, it could be 1 million, doesn't make any difference. I will perform some operation for each one of them. And what actually I'm performing here? I'm creating an empty div, and I'm assigning it to a variable called post. Post now is an empty div. The line after that, I'm adding a class of single post, okay? And now my div was empty, it's still empty, but now I have a div with a class of single post. So this is making a form, okay? This is going to a form. And later on, we are tinkering with the inner HTML, so the children of this, the HTML structure of this. Initially, it is empty. Here, we don't have any content, okay? It's empty. Right now, I want to add to this empty content an h3, so a heading, and not a very big heading, and a heading 3. And this heading will hold the title of each one of my posts, because this number initially is 0, then is 1, 2, 3, 4, until I reach 99, okay? Just before the length of the array, which is 100. So this can be 0, can be 99, depending of the cycle I'm in. So I'm grabbing a different title every time from the array, and I'm creating an h3. And then I'm doing the same thing, but I'm creating now a paragraph and adding the body of the post itself. So now so before I have just the h3, and now I'm appending another paragraph, which holds actually the response of the response. So this is holding the body property of each one of the comments that makes in total the response. Okay, makes sense. And this is the most important line, because if I skip this, nothing will show in the page. I need every post to be appended to my reference, okay, to the section which initially is empty. And if I skip this, I will create everything, but it will not be visible in the page because I'm not appending it anywhere. My snowball, my Christmas tree ball is yet in my hand. I need to append it to the tree. And when I append it to the tree, this will do, and this will append it every single post of the for loop, okay? Because this is still in the for loop. The for loop ends here. So for every post, I'm appending into the page, and now my page actually is made of posts, okay? And I also have a class list. So for each element, I have a class now. And as you can see, a single post. And so as a final touch, I can, in the head, for example, create a style tag and say, oh, you know what? Every single post will have, I don't know, a color of red, okay? Very stupid. So the text of each one of my posts will be red, because every post I created has the same class, so I can reference those. Probably a more convenient thing will be, I don't know, just a heading. So let's call something like this, okay? Single post h3 will color just the title, okay? This does make a little more sense. And you can say, okay, the h3 will be red, and the single post paragraph will be font size 0.8 EM. Okay, so a little smaller than the default size. And so, okay, they're really small. Let's make 8.9. Okay, yeah, still very small, but yeah, you can work with those content. Okay, you can style it, because this is why we add a class into it, because we can now work with CSS and make this a little pretty. This is very ugly. This is just a proof of concept, but yeah, this is working. So, question time. We actually finished, so you are relieved. If you want to leave, it has been a pleasure to speak with you. Otherwise, this is Q&A. Do you have any question, guys and girls?
I have one.
Yeah.
When you created the div section to append the content, why did you put at the top instead at the end of the script? Since the code goes line by line, it will make, in a logic sense, more that it would be at the end of the script, of the tag script, instead than before of the tag script.
Nice question. See, sure, yeah. So basically what we are doing here, we are creating the div, which is empty. So remember, I'm referencing this div in the code, okay? If I put this after the fact, if I would put this after the script, the application will probably crash. Or let's say I could not append anything to anything, because a post section reference now is getting a reference to the DOM. Okay, so if I put this later, the script, this will execute line by line, just like you said, and this will not find any reference because the element is yet to be created. Okay, this is why you put script tags at the end of everything, because you want the initial structure of the page and then you want to target it in JavaScript. If I put the script before or in other places, this can be a problem, because you may want to target something that has not been created, that has not been inserted into the DOM yet. And so you are appending your posts to null, to anything.
So it's similar when we create an empty array, before then we create the function, the same situation.
Yeah, exactly. So we are, in order to this get element by ID to be working, the element must be already in place. Okay, if you do this beforehand, you will not find the node you are pointing to, and so this is a problem. Thank you very much. Okay, anything else? Is everything clear? Okay.
Please remember, you have the power of reactions.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Thank you, all of you guys. It has been a pleasure for me as well. So if we don't have anything else to say, I will first and foremost thank you for this lesson. Okay, it was a pleasure. Stay tuned on the Discord channel. I will post this recording. I will post the code. Of course, I write with you, and we will later tomorrow I will give you the homework regarding this kind of stuff. Okay, and if you enjoyed it, yeah, I'm really grateful, and I hope to see you soon, maybe in another class. Thank you very much for your time, and see you next time.